Lightning split the sky above Blackwood Abbey as Miss Isabella Harrow stepped down from the battered post-chaise, rain lashing her face like 1,000 tiny needles. At 24, she had once been the belle of county assemblies, daughter of a respected baronet. Now, soaked to the skin in a mourning black cloak 2 seasons out of fashion, she clutched a single valise and fought the wind toward the massive oak doors. The butler who admitted her was as forbidding as the Gothic arches overhead, tall, gaunt, with eyes like polished onyx. "Miss Harrow," he intoned, taking her dripping cloak without warmth. "His Grace expects you in the crimson study. This way." Isabella followed through corridors where candle flames trembled in perpetual draught. Portraits of stern Blackwood ancestors glared down, their painted jewels glinting like accusations. She had come for a position as governess to the Duke's ward, a girl of 7 who had dismissed 5 predecessors in 2 years. The salary was generous, the references required none. Desperation had made her accept sight unseen. The crimson study glowed like a furnace heart. Behind a vast ebony desk sat Vincent Blackwood, 6th Duke of Kesgrave. He did not rise. 36 years old, broad-shouldered, with raven hair and eyes the color of storm clouds over steel. His reputation preceded him. Widowed 5 years ago, reclusive, ruthlessly competent, and utterly cold. "Miss Harrow." His voice was low, precise, edged with displeasure. "You are late. The roads were flooded, Your Grace. Excuses bore me." He gestured to a chair opposite him. "Sit." She obeyed, spine straight despite trembling knees. He studied her as one might a ledger entry, calculating, impersonal. "You understand the terms. You will instruct Miss Lydia Blackwood, my late wife's niece and my legal ward, in reading, French, music, deportment, and moral discipline. She is willful, headstrong. She has driven away every woman sent to tame her. You will not indulge tantrums, sentiment, or familiarity. Lydia will learn obedience. If you cannot enforce it, you will leave the same day." Isabella met his gaze. "And if the child's willfulness stems from grief rather than defiance?" A muscle ticked in his jaw. "Grief is no excuse for chaos. My household runs on order." "Your household," she said quietly. "Or your prison?" Silence crackled. Then, astonishingly, the Duke's mouth curved. Not quite a smile, but something dangerous. "You have spirit. Let us see how long it survives." He rose, towering. "Salary £30 per annum, paid quarterly. Quarters in the North Tower. Meals with upper servants. You report to me every Friday. Fail, and you depart with 1 month's wage. Succeed," he paused, "and perhaps you will earn more than coin." As she was dismissed, Isabella felt those steel eyes follow her. She told herself she could endure ice for security. But deep in her chest, something stirred: defiance, curiosity, fear. In the nursery, she found Lydia, a small girl with wild golden curls and huge amber eyes, crouched behind a fortress of overturned chairs. The child regarded her warily. "I'm Isabella," she said softly, kneeling. "I'm told you're a fearsome pirate queen who sinks governesses." A flicker. "They were boring. Then I shall endeavor not to be." Isabella pulled a crumpled paper boat from her pocket. "Made on the journey. Shall we launch a fleet in the rain barrel?" For the first time, Lydia smiled. Downstairs, the Duke listened to the echo of childish laughter, a sound absent from Blackwood Abbey for years, and felt something fracture inside his carefully guarded heart. Isabella's first week at Blackwood Abbey unfolded like a quiet rebellion, small victories piling up like autumn leaves in hidden corners of the vast estate. In the sun-dappled schoolroom each morning, Lydia traced her letters not on dull slates, but on scraps of parchment addressed to imaginary woodland fairies. "If we write neatly," Isabella whispered conspiratorially, "they'll grant wishes." Lydia's tongue peeked from the corner of her mouth in fierce concentration, and by week's end she could spell enchantment without hesitation. French conjugations became incantations in a sorceress's ancient grimoire. "Je vole," Lydia declared dramatically, arms flung wide as though taking flight. "Two vols," Isabella answered, spinning the child until giggles echoed off the paneled walls. Music lessons were the greatest triumph. Lydia, who had once banged the pianoforte keys in sullen protest, now pounded out cheerful rhythms, while Isabella invented absurd verses about rebellious kittens who refused to wear ribbons and plotted midnight adventures on the rooftops. The child's laughter rang clear and bright, a sound the Abbey's corridors had forgotten. Color returned to Lydia's pale cheeks. Her amber eyes sparkled instead of stared listlessly at the floor. Most precious of all, she began sleeping through the night without the terrified cries that had haunted the nursery for years. Yet every Friday at dusk, Isabella faced judgment. She entered the Duke's study with her weekly report clutched like a shield. The room smelled of beeswax, leather, and the faint bite of wood smoke from the cavernous hearth. Vincent Blackwood sat behind his ebony desk, broad-shouldered and forbidding, raven hair catching the firelight. He read her careful pages in silence, the only sound the scratch of a log shifting in the grate. When he finally looked up, his storm-gray eyes pinned her in place. "You have transformed arithmetic into games of pirates and buried treasure," he said, voice low and precise. "Yes, Your Grace. Lydia now adds and subtracts columns faster than I can invent new riddles. And you permit her to run wild through the conservatory." She was cataloging tropical specimens for a botany project. Isabella replied evenly. "We identified 3 varieties of orchid and pressed leaves for her collection." His long fingers drummed once on the desktop, a rare betrayal of emotion. "She is not here for amusement." Isabella lifted her chin. "She is 7 years old, Your Grace. Amusement is how children discover joy. And joy, I believe, is how they heal." The air grew thick. Vincent's gaze darkened, shadows gathering behind the steel. "Joy did not save her aunt," he said at last, the words rough, as though dragged from a place he kept locked. "Nor my wife." Silence fell, heavy as winter snow. Isabella had pieced together the whispers from servants and villagers. 5 years ago, the beautiful Duchess Caroline had taken a fatal fall during a morning ride, 8 months pregnant, with the heir Vincent had longed for. Grief had turned the Duke to stone. Lydia, Caroline's orphan niece, taken in as ward, had arrived soon after, a living reminder of everything lost. "Perhaps," Isabella said softly, daring what no previous governess had, "joy might yet save Lydia." Vincent rose abruptly, towering over the desk. "You overstep, Miss Harrow." His tone could have frozen rivers. Any other woman would have curtsied and fled. Isabella held his stare. "I speak only what I observe, Your Grace. The child blossoms when shown kindness. Surely that is worth consideration." For a long moment he said nothing. Then, to her astonishment, he did not dismiss her. "You will continue, for now," he said curtly, resuming his seat. "But I will not have my household turned into a circus." She curtsied and withdrew, heart hammering against her ribs. That same night, long after the Abbey had settled into stillness, Isabella woke to the sound of muffled sobbing. She hurried into the nursery to find Lydia curled into a tight ball beneath the covers, rag doll clutched to her chest. "What is it, sweetheart?" Isabella gathered the trembling child into her arms. "I heard Mrs. Graves talking to the housemaid," Lydia whispered against her shoulder. "She said Papa will send you away, just like the others. That you're too soft." Isabella's heart clenched. She stroked the golden curls, breathing in the scent of lavender soap and childhood. "Then we shall simply have to prove I'm indispensable," she murmured, rocking gently. "You and I together. We'll show him how strong joy can be." Lydia's sobs quieted to hiccups. Eventually her breathing evened into sleep, small hand fisted in Isabella's nightgown. Unseen in the shadowed doorway, Vincent stood motionless. He had come to check on Lydia after a restless hour in his study, drawn by some instinct he could not name. Now he watched Isabella soothe his ward, his daughter in every way that mattered, with a tenderness that twisted something deep inside his chest. The firelight from the nursery hearth painted warm gold across Isabella's profile, the gentle curve of her cheek, the loose braid of chestnut hair falling over one shoulder, the steady rise and fall of her breathing as she held the sleeping child. Vincent's hand tightened on the doorframe. He had built walls of ice around his heart to survive unbearable loss. Discipline, order, distance, these were his armor. Yet here, in this quiet moment, he felt the first hairline crack splinter through that frozen defense. He turned away before either woman could sense his presence, retreating down the darkened corridor like a man fleeing something he was not yet ready to face. But the image followed him, Lydia safe in Isabella's arms, and the dangerous warmth kindling in a place he had long declared dead. The Dowager Duchess, Eleanor Blackwood, Vincent's formidable mother, arrived unannounced, descending upon the abbey like a benevolent storm. Her presence filled every corridor, every high-ceilinged room, leaving an almost tangible tension in her wake. Though she moved with the grace of one accustomed to command, there was an air of unpredictability about her. One never knew whether she would leave warmth or scrutiny in her wake. She summoned Isabella to the morning room the very first day, a grand chamber where sunlight pooled over polished oak floors and embroidered tapestries. The tea table was set with the delicate precision that spoke of decades of refinement. Porcelain cups gleamed, silver spoons rested perfectly atop linen napkins, and the aroma of Earl Grey mingled with the faint scent of polished wood. "Sit, child. Tea." Eleanor's voice was calm, but carried the subtle authority of a command. Isabella obeyed, lowering herself into the high-backed chair, feeling the weight of the Duchess's gaze settle upon her like a judge's scrutiny. Eleanor, though 70, had the kind of presence that demanded attention. Her hair, silver and smooth, was pulled into a meticulous chignon, and her eyes, sharp as a rapier, missed nothing. She studied Isabella over the rim of her porcelain cup, measuring, calculating, assessing. "You've wrought miracles with Lydia." The child laughs again. "Extraordinary." Isabella lowered her gaze, stirring her tea absently. "I only give her what she needs." Eleanor leaned forward slightly, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. "Love," she said bluntly. "Something my son believes dangerous." Isabella hesitated. The words seemed to hover between them, heavy and dangerous, and yet undeniable. "He fears feeling," she ventured carefully. "He fears loss," Eleanor corrected, setting down her cup with delicate finality. Her gaze drifted toward the window, where the late morning sun fell across the garden. Vincent adored his wife, Caroline. Her death shattered him. He blames himself, believes if he'd forbidden that ride, if he had prevented her from leaving that day, perhaps she would still be here. She turned back to Isabella, eyes piercing yet sorrowful. He wrapped himself in ice to survive. Lydia reminds him too much of what he lost. Isabella felt a pang of sympathy for the young girl's father, but she also felt the weight of responsibility pressing down. Every step she took, every gentle word she offered to Lydia, was an act of rebellion against the invisible walls Vincent had built around himself. That evening, Eleanor orchestrated a confrontation. She invited Vincent to the nursery at tea time, an event unprecedented in the Abbey. Isabella had prepared herself for some sort of domestic chaos, a cold dismissal, or a curt command to leave. She did not expect the man himself to enter with the quiet authority of a predator stepping into unfamiliar territory. Vincent appeared in the doorway, tall and imposing, his dark hair falling in loose waves, eyes shadowed yet alert. He paused, surveying the scene before him. Lydia sat perched on Isabella's lap, a picture book open before them. The soft glow of the fireplace reflected in the girl's wide eyes, the curls around her face golden and untamed. The room exuded a domestic warmth Vincent had spent months avoiding, a world that he had shunned to protect his own heart. "Papa," Lydia exclaimed, bright and unguarded. "Listen, Miss Bella says the dragon was lonely, not wicked." She turned a page eagerly, her small fingers tracing the illustrations. Vincent's throat worked, a soundless emotion caught somewhere between grief and longing. He stepped closer, though he did not move past the threshold, and the words he spoke were clipped, careful. Indeed, the moment was taut with unspoken tension. Isabella felt the child shift slightly, sensing the weight of her father's presence. Vincent's gaze lingered on Lydia, but he did not approach, did not speak further. He observed, a silent sentinel in the shadows. Later, Eleanor cornered him in the dimly lit hallway, her posture commanding yet tempered with concern. The Duchess's voice was a mixture of steel and softness, each word chosen with precision. "You will drive that girl away with your frost, and Lydia will retreat again. Is that what you want?" Vincent's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. "I want order. You want punishment for surviving when Caroline did not," Eleanor replied, her voice softening as her hand brushed a lock of hair from her temple. "Let yourself feel, Vincent, before you lose everything that matters." He turned sharply, storming away, the echoes of his boots resounding against the marble floors. But Eleanor's words had found purchase in his mind, burrowing into corners he had long thought sealed. That night, Isabella awoke to the faint rustle of sheets. At first, she thought it was the wind, but then she felt the slight tremor of a small body climbing onto her bed. Lydia's eyes were wide, brimming with tears, and her little hands clutched the blankets as if they could protect her from the shadows of a nightmare. Isabella gathered the girl into her arms, rocking gently, whispering reassurances into her ear. "It's all right, my love. You're safe. It was just a dream." The girl shivered, her breaths uneven. Isabella pressed a hand to Lydia's forehead, checking for fever, and her mind wandered to Vincent. He had not been here, and yet she felt his presence, a heavy, almost imperceptible weight at the doorway. She looked up and saw him there, a shadow framed by the soft candlelight. He did not speak. He did not move closer. He only watched, his expression unreadable, a storm behind his dark eyes. And then, just as silently, he vanished into the darkness. The sight left Isabella unsettled. Vincent's presence, though unannounced, was a declaration, an assertion that he was still part of this family, still tethered to Lydia, still unwilling to let go of his grief. Yet his absence and action spoke volumes. He could not yet cross the threshold of warmth, of vulnerability, of human touch. As she held Lydia close, rocking the child until her breathing evened, Isabella realized that her role was more crucial than ever. She was the bridge between a father frozen in his grief and a daughter desperate for love. She was the light Vincent feared, the warmth he had shut out. And for all the walls Eleanor had warned him about, Isabella understood that patience, gentle persistence, and courage might be the only weapons strong enough to reach him. Hours later, the abbey lay quiet, save for the occasional creak of timber and the whispering wind outside the windows. Isabella stayed awake long after Lydia had fallen into a peaceful slumber, thinking of Vincent's silent vigil and Eleanor's warnings. The weight of responsibility pressed on her chest, not just for the child, but for the fractured heart of the man who fathered her charge. Outside, the moonlight bathed the abbey's stone walls in silver, the shadows stretching long and cold. Inside, the morning room and the nursery and the hallways all seemed to pulse with the unspoken tension of a family bound by loss and love alike. Isabella felt the enormity of her task settle over her like a cloak. Heavy, demanding, necessary. She whispered to herself, more a promise than a thought, "I will not fail them. Not Lydia. Not Vincent. Not even the Duchess's expectations." And somewhere in the shadows, Vincent Blackwood watched, unknowingly giving Isabella the chance she needed, to reach both the man and the child, to heal what grief had fractured, and to uncover the warmth that might one day thaw his carefully constructed ice. The abbey had grown quieter over the past weeks, its halls filled with the hush of winter settling in. But quiet was a fragile thing, easily shattered by rumor, and rumors, it seemed, had found their way inside. Servants whispered behind closed doors, treading softly on polished floors as if their steps alone might carry gossip. Visitors' eyes lingered too long, their smiles polite but sharp, masks that barely concealed judgment. Isabella Harrow, the young governess who had arrived with a letter of recommendation and a determined heart, was no longer merely a caretaker of Lydia Blackwood. In the eyes of the world, or at least in the gossip that wound its way through the abbey, she had become a topic of fascination and subtle scandal. The origin of these rumors was a mixture of truth and embellishment. Isabella had once been engaged to a viscount's son, a man whose intentions were shallow and whose patience was thin. When her father's finances collapsed, the engagement was broken. She had been left not only publicly humiliated but reduced in the eyes of the aristocracy to a fallen gentlewoman, an epithet whispered with distaste in parlors and drawing rooms. Now, with her presence at the abbey, every visitor's mind seemed eager to revisit that history. Vincent, who had maintained a careful distance from these social entanglements, overheard a particularly cutting remark one afternoon. A house guest, a man with a lined face and a sneer that seemed permanently etched in place, had whispered loudly enough for the nearby staff to catch. "Keeping a pretty bankrupt aristocrat under one's roof. Convenient." Rage flared within Vincent, sharp and unexpected. Protective instinct collided with his habitual coldness, and he felt a heat rise to his chest that surprised even him. Without a word, he dismissed the guest, his authority undeniable, leaving the man no choice but to retreat. But anger, as Vincent had learned long ago, could not be confined to others. It demanded a channel, and the inevitable confrontation came later that evening. Isabella was in the library, seated near the window, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. Moonlight spilled across her hair, silvering the chestnut strands, illuminating the delicate curve of her jaw and the steady composure she wore like armor. Vincent's entrance was sudden and commanding, his footsteps echoing in the high-ceilinged room. The faint draft from the open window stirred the edges of the heavy curtains, as if the abbey itself anticipated the tension about to unfold. "Why did you not disclose your past?" he demanded, his voice low but edged with accusation. His eyes, dark and penetrating, bore into hers as though he sought to unravel the very fabric of her character. Isabella's gaze did not waver. She set down her cup with quiet deliberation, the clink of porcelain a subtle counterpoint to the storm of unspoken emotion between them. "Because it is past," she said steadily. "I am here for Lydia." He stepped closer, the heat of his presence making the room seem smaller, more intimate. "And for security," he pressed. "Yes," she admitted, her voice firm but calm. "I will not lie, but I am no adventuress." The words hung in the air, a mixture of truth and quiet defiance. Their eyes locked, the tension between them crackling like the embers in the fireplace. There was anger, yes, and mistrust, but beneath it simmered something else, something neither of them fully understood yet dared not name aloud. "You challenge me at every turn," Vincent said roughly, his jaw tight, voice betraying a flicker of frustration he could not suppress. "Because you are wrong about what Lydia needs," Isabella replied without hesitation. Her eyes softened slightly, but her tone retained a firmness that mirrored his own. "And perhaps about what you need." Vincent's gaze flickered, and for a moment, the ice in his demeanor seemed to crack. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the faint warmth emanating from him. "Careful, Isabella," he warned, low and husky, but he did not retreat. Her heart stuttered in her chest, and though she did not falter, a blush crept to her cheeks. There was an unspoken understanding in that space, a delicate dance of attraction and restraint. Each word, each look, carried weight, and the abbey seemed to hold its breath, as though it too were aware of the fragile tension in the library. Later, in the quiet of the nursery, the innocence of Lydia's voice broke through the heavy atmosphere. The child's eyes, bright and unjudging, looked up at Isabella with the kind of trust only a young heart could offer. "Why does Papa look at you like you're a puzzle?" Lydia asked innocently, her small fingers fidgeting with the hem of her nightdress. Isabella's chest tightened. She knelt beside the girl, brushing a curl from her forehead. "Perhaps because I am," she said softly, a faint smile touching her lips. Her mind, however, was a tempest of thought. Vincent's looks, sharp yet vulnerable, intrigued her and unnerved her in equal measure. How could someone so controlled, so seemingly impervious to emotion, be undone by the presence of a mere governess? Outside, the first snow began to fall, early, heavy, and insistent. Flakes drifted lazily at first, then thickened, blanketing the abbey's gardens in white, muffling the world beyond its stone walls. The isolation was complete. The abbey felt like a fortress, encased not only in history and stone, but now in winter's quiet embrace. The snow was beautiful, cruel in its way, a reminder that the world beyond might judge, gossip, or ignore them, but within these walls, truth and conflict reigned. Isabella rose to the window and watched the flurries swirl, reflecting on the delicate balance she now occupied. She had come to the abbey to care for Lydia, yet her presence had stirred emotions she had not anticipated: anger, suspicion, attraction, and a quiet admiration that she did not dare acknowledge. Vincent, for all his coldness and pride, had become a force she could not ignore, his every movement and glance demanding careful consideration. The snow continued to fall through the night, and the abbey settled into a hush that was both serene and suffocating. In the nursery, Lydia slept soundly, oblivious to the complex dance of adult emotions that swirled around her. Isabella sat near the window, the frost gathering in delicate patterns on the glass, thinking of Vincent and the fragile, unspoken bond forming between them. It was a bond neither fully understood yet, a combination of respect, challenge, and something far more dangerous, a spark of desire tempered by duty and circumstance. They were trapped in the abbey together, a house alive with history, gossip, and secrets, with walls that seemed to observe and judge. Every glance, every word, every gesture carried consequence. As the wind howled outside and the snow blanketed the grounds in silence, Isabella knew the coming days would demand patience, courage, and keen awareness. Rumors, whispers, and scandal would not simply vanish. They would test her, Vincent, and the fragile family they were trying to protect. Yet as she watched the snow drift and settled over the abbey's towers, she felt a quiet determination. She would not allow herself to be diminished by the judgment of others. She would care for Lydia, challenge Vincent, and navigate the labyrinth of emotion, pride, and expectation that surrounded them. The abbey was isolated, the winter relentless, and yet within its walls, something new was taking shape, a fragile, tense connection between governess and master, protector and child, past and possibility. And somewhere, in the silence beneath the snow and the hush of the halls, both Isabella and Vincent would discover that the heart, once thawed, could not be contained, even in a house as formidable and cold as the abbey itself. The abbey had taken on a new rhythm as winter settled fully over the grounds. Snow lay thick against the high stone walls, and frost glazed the leaded windows with delicate, crystalline patterns. Isabella moved quietly through the halls each morning, carrying boxes of greenery, scraps of ribbon, and the small secrets of her covert project. The abbey, normally austere and silent, was about to witness a small rebellion, a rebellion of joy, of color, of warmth. She had chosen the nursery for her endeavors. A small evergreen tree, smuggled up from the village market, now stood in the corner, its scent faintly piney but undeniably festive. Strings of paper chains looped across the walls, their bright colors almost shocking against the muted tones of the nursery. Candles were tucked into sconces, and a handful of simple wooden toys were arranged as if in anticipation of Christmas morning. Lydia was the willing accomplice. The child's laughter echoed softly as she held a paper chain aloft, proud of her contribution. "Look, Miss Bella, the dragon can live here too." She placed a small painted dragon ornament carefully upon the tree, her fingers trembling with excitement. Isabella smiled, watching the child's delight, and felt a flicker of triumph. "It's perfect, Lydia. You've made it magical." Yet magic in the abbey was precarious. Vincent had discovered hints of the plan, ribbons left in the hallways, greenery misplaced in his study, and he had nearly forbidden it outright. Isabella had felt the frost in his voice, the stiff precision of his commands, and for a brief moment feared her efforts were doomed. Then Eleanor intervened once more, her presence a calm but insistent force. "Vincent," she had said softly but firmly, "perhaps the child needs joy more than order. And perhaps you do too." Vincent had scowled, but there was a hesitation in his eyes that Isabella had not seen before, a crack in the wall he had built around himself. For all his pride and caution, something had yielded. Christmas Eve arrived, and the abbey was quiet except for the muffled patter of snow against the windows. Isabella and Lydia were seated on the nursery floor, finishing the last paper chains, when the door opened. Vincent entered, his dark coat brushing the threshold, and for the first time since Lydia had been a toddler, she ran to him with abandon. Arms outstretched, she collided with his chest, stiff at first, then melting into an embrace as he adjusted her in his arms. For a long moment, he held her tighter than necessary, as if afraid she might disappear. His jaw was tense, but his eyes softened, revealing a vulnerability he rarely allowed to surface. Isabella stood a few steps away, hands clasped, her chest tight with emotion. Tears prickled her eyes, unshed but threatening to fall. "Papa," Lydia whispered against his coat, her tiny hands clutching his collar. Vincent's fingers rested lightly against her back, hesitant but protective. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he lowered her so she could place another ornament on the tree, but the warmth of his presence lingered in the room, filling the space with a quiet gravity. Isabella moved closer, adjusting a string of beads that had slipped. She dared a glance at Vincent, catching him watching her with an intensity that made her stomach flutter. He was always watchful, but tonight the scrutiny felt different, less judgmental, more searching. Later, the nursery emptied for the night, and Isabella remained behind, tending to the fire and arranging a string of popcorn across the mantel. The warm glow of the hearth bathed the room in gold, reflecting off the ornaments and casting dancing shadows across the walls. The abbey felt unusually intimate, its cold stones softened by candlelight and the lingering scent of pine. Vincent entered quietly, moving toward her with a step measured and deliberate. He leaned against the mantelpiece, watching her with an expression that teetered between curiosity and something more fragile, something he rarely allowed himself to reveal. "Why do you stay?" he asked quietly, his voice low, carrying the weight of long-suppressed emotion. "When I am difficult, when I make it hard to." He stopped abruptly, as if even speaking the truth was an effort. Isabella straightened, her gaze meeting his. "Because Lydia needs you to be more than difficult," she replied softly, her voice unwavering. "And because," she hesitated, the words hovering between them, fragile and unspoken. "Because," he prompted, stepping closer, dark eyes intent on hers. She drew a steadying breath, allowing herself a moment of courage. "Because I see the man beneath the ice," she said finally, her voice firm but gentle. "And he is worth melting for." Vincent's gaze flickered, caught between disbelief and something tender. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out and brushed a stray curl from her cheek. The touch was light, almost hesitant, but it carried an unspoken admission, a recognition of connection, of trust, of something neither had dared to name. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to just the two of them. The warmth of the fire, the scent of pine, the faint flicker of candlelight, all of it seemed suspended in time, a perfect, fragile bubble. Footsteps sounded from the hall, breaking the spell. Lydia's small voice called out, "Miss Bella, Papa, come see the star on the tree." The moment shattered, reality rushing back, but the warmth lingered. Vincent's hand fell away, but the intensity in his eyes remained, a silent acknowledgement of what had passed between them. Isabella felt it too, a thread of something unspoken, something that promised possibility amidst the chaos of snow, secrecy, and unspoken longing. Together, they moved toward Lydia, carrying the remnants of their small rebellion against formality and frost. The child's laughter filled the room, ringing out clear and pure, and for the first time in months, the abbey seemed to breathe easier. Isabella watched Vincent lift Lydia once more, holding her with a tenderness that was both awkward and profound. She realized, with a quiet certainty, that the barriers Vincent had built around himself were beginning to yield, not fully, not yet, but in moments like these, even ice could crack. The abbey, cloaked in snow and candlelight, felt alive with hope. Outside, the world remained cold and indifferent, but within the nursery walls, warmth had taken root. It was fragile, fleeting, but undeniable, a gift Isabella had given, not only to Lydia, but to Vincent as well. And as the three of them stood together, stringing popcorn and placing ornaments, Isabella felt the first stirrings of something deeper. Love, perhaps, or at least the beginning of it, a subtle, dangerous, beautiful flame, fragile yet insistent, glowing amid the frost. This Christmas, the abbey was no longer a place of strict order and frozen pride. It had become something more, a home, a sanctuary, a place where the impossible, warmth, laughter, connection, might finally take hold. Chapter 6. The Breaking Point. Spring brought crisis. Lydia fell ill, fever, delirium. Physicians came and went. Vincent never left her bedside. Isabella nursed tirelessly. In delirium, Lydia called for her mama. Vincent's face crumpled. When the crisis passed, he found Isabella asleep in a chair, exhausted. He carried her to her room, laying her gently on the bed. As he pulled a blanket over her, she stirred. Vincent, the use of his name undid him. He sat, head in hands. "I cannot lose her too," he whispered. "You won't." Isabella took his hand. "But you must let yourself love her fully. Risk the pain." He looked at her raw. "And you?" "I already do." Silence stretched, electric. Then he leaned forward, forehead touching hers. "I am terrified." "I know." Their lips met, hesitant, then desperate. Years of grief and restraint poured into that kiss. But dawn brought reality. A letter from Isabella's former fiancé, now repentant and wealthy, offering marriage and restoration of her status. She burned it unread. Some choices were irrevocable. Summer. The ton descended for a house party Eleanor insisted upon. Malicious tongues sharpened. A duke cannot marry his governess. Scandal. Degradation of the bloodline. Vincent overheard ladies mocking Isabella's reduced circumstances. He announced publicly, "Miss Harrow has done more for my daughter than any woman of rank ever could. I am honored by her presence." Gasps rippled. That night, he proposed in the moonlit rose garden. "Isabella, I am a difficult man, but I love you. Marry me, not as governess, but as my duchess." Tears fell. Yes, but opposition mounted. A powerful marquis, owed favors by Vincent's late father, threatened to call in debts unless the engagement ended. Vincent refused. Financial ruin loomed. Isabella overheard. "I will not be the cause of your downfall. You are my salvation," he countered fiercely. They stood together against the storm. A greater secret emerged. Among Caroline's papers, Isabella found letters suggesting Lydia was not Caroline's niece, but her daughter, born secretly before her marriage to Vincent, given to relatives to hide the shame. Vincent confronted his mother. Eleanor confessed. Caroline had feared he would reject her past. All these years, Vincent had raised his own daughter unknowingly. Fearing her resemblance to Caroline was torment alone. The revelation shattered and healed him. He went to Lydia. "You are my daughter. Truly. Always." Lydia's joy mended the final fracture. But the Marquis pressed his advantage, revealing he held the mortgage on Isabella's ruined family estate, planning to force her return to poverty. Vincent paid it anonymously. No leverage remained. Autumn again. Blackwood Abbey glowed with light and laughter. Vincent and Isabella married quietly in the Abbey chapel, Lydia scattering rose petals, Eleanor beaming. At the wedding breakfast, Vincent toasted, "To the woman who taught me that ice cannot protect the heart, it only imprisons it," and to the daughter who melted it completely. Later, walking the grounds, Isabella teased, "You were quite quackers once, Your Grace." He laughed, freely, deeply. "And you, my love, were the duck who waddled straight into my heart." Lydia ran ahead, chasing leaves. Vincent pulled Isabella close. "I was afraid to feel again. You made me brave, and you made me believe in second chances." As snow began to fall, gentle now, welcoming, they stood together, a family forged not by blood alone, but by courage, forgiveness, and love strong enough to thaw the coldest heart. Blackwood Abbey, once a tomb of grief, rang with joy everlasting.